Constitution of the United States was ratified in 1787. It said that citizens had the right to vote, but it didn't give specific guidelines of who could vote. Over time, most states said that white men who owned land could vote, but not people of color or women. It took more than 100 years of debate, sacrifice, and even some people being put into jail before women gained the right to vote.
In July 1848, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott got together with some of their friends and planned a convention in New York to promote women's rights. To prepare for the convention, Elizabeth rewrote the Declaration of Independence and called it the Declaration of Sentiments. In the Declaration of Sentiments, it listed the ways that women were unequal to men, including the lack of the right to vote and not being able to hold a position with the government, not being able to own property, and more. She wrote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." When the convention was held, 300 men and women attended. In the first session, only women were allowed to participate. In the second, men were also allowed to join. This marked the beginning of the women's suffrage movement in the United States.
The American Equal Rights Association, or the AERA, was founded on May 10, 1866 at the 11th Women's Rights Convention. The founding women were Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Lucretia Mott. Lucretia was elected as the president. When the 15th Amendment was ratified, giving black men the right to vote, Anthony and Stanton became angry and left, starting their own group called the National Women's Suffrage Association, or the NWSA. They said that if anyone should get the right to vote, it should be white women because they were more educated. What was left of the original group became the American Women's Suffrage Association, or the AWSA. Later, they were able to settle their differences and joined together to become the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or the NAWSA. In 1890, their critics called them suffragettes to make them feel small or unimportant. Instead, they adopted the name wholeheartedly, and it stuck.
In November 1872, Susan B. Anthony voted in the presidential election, even though it was illegal. The election workers still accepted her ballot. On the 28th of that month, she was thrown into jail for criminal voting. Even though they charged her a fine of $100, she didn't pay it.
On March 3, 1913, there was a women's suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. That was led by Alice Paul and the NAWSA. There were over 5,000 suffragettes, 20 floats, and 9 bands in the parade. Some of the spectators attacked the marchers while the police did little to stop them. By the end of the parade, there were over 100 women that had to be hospitalized due to their injuries.
Even though the suffragettes all wanted the right to vote, they excluded black women from most of their groups and get-togethers. While Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton were writing a book about the great accomplishments of white suffragettes, they completely ignored the great contributions of black suffragettes. One of these women was Ida B. Wells. She was a journalist and a teacher. Even though she was born into slavery, 6 months later, she and her family were freed. She might have been free, but she still didn't have equal rights with white women.
Some of the people who campaigned for women's rights to vote used aggressive actions to get what they wanted, like attacking property. As a result, some were thrown in jail. While in jail, they refused to eat, so the workers had to force feed them by strapping them down and placing a tube down the nostril or throat to push food into their stomachs. On July 5, 1909, Marion Wallace Dunlop, who was in jail at the time, decided to go on a hunger strike and refused all food for several days. After 91 hours of fasting, the jail authorities released her, afraid that she might die. After that, many suffragettes did what Marion Wallace Dunlop did to get out of jail.
Finally, after many years of trials and hardships, on The 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, granting women the right to vote, was passed in August 1920. In order for the amendment to be ratified, 3/4 of the states had to vote in favor of it. In 1920, that meant 36 states were needed to ratify the amendment. Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan were the first states to ratify it. Georgia was the first state to vote against it. On August 18th, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment. On the 26th, the amendment was certified. These women were so excited to finally have the right to vote. Sadly, there were hardly any of the original members around who started the fight for the right to vote. Although this was a great time for women, it would be another 4.5 decades before Black women were widely permitted to vote when the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. Voting is a sacred privilege in our country, so we always need to work to protect it.